Once upon a time, in the ancient city of Owerri, there lived a woman named Ifeoma, whose greatest dream was slowly turning into her deepest nightmare. For 8 long years, Ifeoma had been trying to have a baby. 8 years of hospital visits, fertility treatments, traditional medicine, prayer sessions, fasting, and hope that repeatedly died and was resurrected only to die again. She was 32 years old when she married Dubem, a successful businessman who owned several electronics shops across the city. Their wedding had been beautiful, filled with promises and expectations. Everyone assumed children would follow quickly. But month after month, year after year, Ifeoma's period arrived with the regularity of a curse. At first, Dubem was patient. "It will happen when God wills it," he would say, holding her as she cried. But patience has an expiration date, especially when external pressure becomes unbearable. Dubem's mother, Mama Dubem, made it her personal mission to remind Ifeoma of her failure at every opportunity. "When will I carry my grandchild?" she would ask loudly whenever she visited, not really expecting an answer but making sure everyone within earshot heard the question. "My son married you to give him children, not to be his companion," she said once, her voice sharp as a blade. "If you cannot fulfill your duty as a wife, then what use are you?" Those words cut deeper than any medical diagnosis ever could. Ifeoma tried everything. She drank bitter herbal concoctions that made her vomit. She traveled to prayer mountains where prophets laid hands on her belly and declared breakthrough. She underwent painful procedures in expensive fertility clinics where doctors spoke in technical terms she barely understood. Nothing worked. And with each failure, Dubem grew more distant. He stopped holding her when she cried. He started coming home late. He stopped defending her when his mother made cruel comments. The warmth in their marriage slowly froze into cold politeness. By the 7th year, something inside Ifeoma broke. Not her hope for a child that remained stubbornly alive, but her willingness to accept defeat gracefully. She became desperate in a way that made her capable of things she would never have considered before. One evening, scrolling mindlessly through Facebook, Ifeoma saw a post from a distant cousin, Chioma. It was a vague post about needing advice on a difficult situation. Ifeoma, curious, sent her a private message. They hadn't spoken in years. Chioma was much younger, maybe 23 or 24, living somewhere in Port Harcourt. They exchanged pleasantries before Chioma finally revealed her problem. "I'm pregnant," Chioma typed, "and I can't keep it." Ifeoma's heart skipped. "Why not?" "I'm not married. The father wants nothing to do with me. My parents will disown me if they find out. I've been thinking about, ending it." A terrible, desperate idea began forming in Ifeoma's mind. "Don't do that," Ifeoma typed quickly. What if there was another way?" "Like what?" Ifeoma hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. What she was about to suggest was crazy, wrong, impossible. But desperation makes people brave in the worst ways. "What if you have the baby?" Ifeoma wrote slowly, "and give it to me." There was a long pause. Then, "What do you mean?" "I mean, you don't want the baby. I desperately need one. What if we helped each other?" Another pause, longer this time. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious," Ifeoma typed, her heart pounding. "I would take care of all your medical expenses. I would give you money for afterward, to start fresh, and you would be free from this burden. But how would that even work? People would know it's not yours." And that's when Ifeoma revealed the full scope of her desperate plan. "Not if they think I'm pregnant too." The plan was insane, but Ifioma committed to it with frightening determination. First, she told Dubem she was pregnant. She chose a Friday evening when he came home in a good mood, rare these days. She'd prepared his favorite soup and waited until he'd eaten before speaking. Dubem, she said softly, I have news. He looked up from his phone. What news? I'm pregnant. The fork in his hand froze mid-air. His eyes widened. What? I'm pregnant, she repeated, forcing herself to smile through the lie. I wanted to be sure before telling you. I went to the hospital yesterday. 8 weeks. For a moment, Dubem just stared. Then his face broke into the widest smile she'd seen in years. Ifioma, are you serious? You're pregnant. She nodded, and he jumped up, pulled her into his arms, and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. Thank God! Oh, thank God! After all these years! Ifioma held him tight and tried not to think about the enormity of the lie she'd just told. That weekend, they informed Dubem's mother. The old woman actually cried with happiness, then immediately began giving instructions about what Ifioma should eat, how she should rest, which traditional medicines to take. Finally, Mama Dubem declared, finally, my son's wife has proven herself useful. The words still stung, but Ifioma smiled through them. News spread through the family, through their church, through their neighborhood. Everyone was thrilled. After 8 years of waiting, Ifioma was finally pregnant. Now came the harder part, making it believable. Ifioma bought a pregnancy belly from an online vendor who sold them to actors and photographers. She started small, barely noticeable, then gradually increased the size month by month, the way a real pregnancy would progress. She studied everything about pregnancy, symptoms, cravings, mood swings. She acted tired and nauseous in the mornings. She claimed certain smells made her sick. She developed elaborate food cravings. The hardest part was avoiding doctors. When Dubem suggested they go for a checkup together, Ifioma panicked. No, she said quickly, I want to use a different hospital this time. A friend recommended a specialist in Enugu. Very discreet, very good. Enugu, that's far. Why not here in Owerri? Please, Dubem, Ifioma said, touching her fake belly. After everything we've been through, all the disappointments at hospitals here, I just want to try somewhere new, somewhere without all those painful memories. Dubem, not wanting to upset his pregnant wife, agreed. So Ifioma would go to Enugu for her checkups, which really meant spending the day at a hotel or a friend's house, then returning with fabricated medical reports she'd carefully created using templates she found online. Meanwhile, she stayed in constant contact with Kioma. She sent money for Kioma's actual prenatal care in Port Harcourt. They synchronized their timelines. When Ifioma was 5 months pregnant, Kioma was actually 5 months pregnant. Are you sure about this? Kioma asked during one of their phone calls. I'm sure, Ifioma replied, though her stomach twisted with guilt and fear. This helps both of us. You get to move on with your life, and I finally become a mother. But what if someone finds out? No one will find out, Ifioma said with more confidence than she felt. We just have to be careful. The 9 months passed in a blur of lies and anxiety. Ifioma perfected her performance. She waddled convincingly. She complained about back pain. She rubbed her fake belly in public. She took photos and posted them on social media with captions about God's faithfulness. People showered her with gifts, baby clothes, toys, advice. Her mother-in-law threw her a baby shower that felt like both a celebration and a mockery, given that everything was built on deception. Dubem was attentive in ways he hadn't been in years. He rubbed her feet. He went out late at night to buy whatever she claimed to be craving. He spoke to her belly, telling his unborn child how loved they would be. Every tender moment was a knife in Ifeoma's conscience, but she was too far in to turn back now. As her due date approached, Ifeoma coordinated carefully with Kioma. "The baby is coming any day now," Kioma texted. "I'm at the hospital." "Okay," Ifeoma replied. "Let me know the moment you deliver." 2 days later, at 3 a.m., Kioma sent a message. "It's a boy, healthy, 3.2 kg." Ifeoma's heart pounded as she read the words. This was it, the point of no return. She quietly got out of bed, careful not to wake Dubem, and went to the bathroom. She removed the pregnancy belly and hid it at the bottom of a bag she'd already packed. Then she returned to bed and began moaning softly. "Dubem," she said, shaking him. "Dubem, wake up, something's happening." He shot up immediately. "What? What's wrong?" I think the baby is coming. I'm having pains." Within minutes, they were in the car, speeding toward the hospital she'd claimed to be registered at, though of course she wasn't actually registered there. When they arrived, Ifeoma insisted on going in alone. "Women only," she said firmly. "It's tradition. You wait here. I'll send for you after the delivery." Dubem, too anxious to argue, waited in the parking lot. Inside, Ifeoma didn't go to the maternity ward. Instead, she went straight to the bathroom, called Kioma, and got the details of where she was. Through a helper she'd already paid, the baby was smuggled out of the Port Harcourt hospital and driven to Owerri in the middle of the night. 5 hours later, Ifeoma emerged from a private room, exhausted but triumphant, holding a tiny newborn wrapped in a blue blanket. "It's a boy," she told Dubem, tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time, because despite everything, she was finally holding a baby. Her baby now, even if not by birth. Dubem broke down completely, sobbing as he held his son for the first time. They named him Chukwuebuka, God is great. For 7 years, Ifeoma lived with her secret. Chukwuebuka grew into a bright, healthy, joyful child. He looked nothing like Ifeoma or Dubem, but people said he took after Dubem's late grandmother. Genetics are funny that way. Ifeoma loved him fiercely, protectively. Every morning she woke up terrified that someone would discover the truth. Every time Dubem's family commented on the boy's features, her heart raced. But as years passed and no one questioned anything, Ifeoma began to relax. Maybe she'd gotten away with it. Maybe this secret would die with her. She blocked Chioma on all platforms, cut off all contact, pretended that part of her life had never existed, until one Tuesday afternoon in 2024, when her phone rang with an unknown number. "Hello, Ifeoma, it's Chioma." The voice sent ice through Ifeoma's veins. I don't know anyone by that name," she lied. "Don't play games with me." Chioma's voice was cold. "I want to see my son." "What?" "No, we had an agreement." I was 23 years old and desperate. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. Now I'm 30, married, and I want my child back. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. I've thought about him every day for 7 years. I made a mistake. I want to fix it." "No," Ifeoma said, her voice shaking. "No, you can't. He's my son. I've raised him. He doesn't even know you exist." "Then maybe it's time he learned the truth." Kioma showed up in Owerri 3 days later. She came to Ifeoma's house when Dubem was at work and Chukwuebuka was at school. She looked different, more polished, more confident, wearing expensive clothes and carrying herself like someone who'd moved up in the world. Nice house, Chioma said, looking around. Built on my son, I suppose. What do you want? Ifeoma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I already told you, I want my son back. He's not your son anymore. Actually, Chioma said, pulling papers from her bag, legally he is. I never signed away my parental rights. There was no legal adoption, which means I can take him back anytime I want. Ifeoma felt her knees go weak. I don't want to be cruel, Chioma continued. I know you've raised him and I'm grateful for that. But I've changed. I'm married now to a good man who knows about my past and wants to help me fix my mistake. We can't have children of our own. My son is my only chance at motherhood. Your only chance, Ifeoma's voice broke. What about mine? I spent 8 years trying to have a child. 8 years of pain and disappointment and shame, and now you want to just take away the one piece of happiness I've managed to find? I'm sorry, Chioma said, and she actually looked like she meant it. I truly am, but he's my biological child. I want him back. When Dubem came home that evening, Ifeoma was sitting in the dark, crying. What's wrong? He asked, immediately concerned. She couldn't speak. How could she possibly explain? Ifeoma, talk to me. What happened? I need to tell you something, she finally said, about Chukwuebuka. And she told him everything. Every lie, every deception, the fake pregnancy, Chioma, the secret arrangement, all of it. Dubem listened in absolute silence. His face went through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, shock, anger, hurt, before finally settling into something Ifeoma couldn't quite read. When she finished, he stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. Dubem, please say something. 7 years, he said quietly. 7 years you've been lying to me, every single day. I did it for us, for our marriage. For our marriage. He turned around, and now she could see his face clearly. He looked devastated. You built our entire family on a lie, Ifeoma. Everything I believed about my son, about you, about our life together, it was all false. He's still your son. You've raised him. You love him. That's real. But he's not mine, Dubem said, his voice cracking. Not biologically, not legally. And you knew that every single day while I called him my son, while I planned his future, while I bragged to my friends about him. I'm sorry, Ifeoma sobbed. I'm so sorry. And now this woman wants him back? Ifeoma nodded miserably. Dubem sat down heavily, his head in his hands. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Dubem said, There's something I need to tell you too. Ifeoma looked up, confused. I knew, he said quietly. Knew what? That you couldn't get pregnant because I can't either. I'm sterile, Ifeoma. I've known since before we got married. Now it was Ifeoma's turn to stare in shock. What? I had a test done when I was 24 after a bad case of mumps. The doctor said I would never father children, but I didn't tell you because I was ashamed, because in our culture, a man who can't produce children is seen as less than a man. Ifeoma couldn't breathe. So when you told me you were pregnant, Dubem continued, I knew it was impossible. I knew that baby couldn't be mine. But I was so desperate for a child, so tired of my mother's questions and society's judgment that I convinced myself maybe the doctors were wrong. Maybe it was a miracle. He looked at her with tears in his eyes, but deep down I knew, I always knew, and I chose to believe the lie because the truth was too painful. They sat there in the darkness, two people who had lied to each other for years, finally facing the truth together. The custody case became a nightmare. Chioma filed for custody, and because there was no legal adoption, because Ifeoma and Dubem had no biological or legal claim to Chukwuebuka, the case was straightforward from a legal perspective, but emotionally it was devastating. 7-year-old Chukwuebuka couldn't understand why suddenly there was a strange woman claiming to be his mother, why there were lawyers and courts and angry adults crying and shouting. "Mummy, what's happening?" he asked Ifeoma one night, his little face full of confusion and fear. "Everything will be okay," she lied, because what else could she say? The court ordered a DNA test to confirm maternity. Of course, it confirmed that Chioma was indeed Chukwuebuka's biological mother. The judge looked at Ifeoma with something like pity. "Mrs. Ifeoma, I understand you raised this child with love, but you did so under false pretenses. You essentially kidnapped this child from his biological mother through deception." "She gave him to me," Ifeoma protested. "She didn't want him." "I was 23 and scared," Chioma said from the other side of the courtroom. "I made a decision I regret. But that doesn't mean I should be punished forever by losing my child." In the end, the judge ruled in Chioma's favor. She would get primary custody of Chukwuebuka. Ifeoma and Dubem would be allowed supervised visitation, but the child would live with his biological mother. The day they had to hand him over was the worst day of Ifeoma's life. Chukwuebuka cried and clung to her. "I don't want to go. Mummy, please, I want to stay with you." "I know, baby, I know," Ifeoma sobbed, trying to pry his small hands from around her neck. "But you have to go, just for a little while." "Why? What did I do wrong?" "Nothing, my love. You did nothing wrong. This is all Mummy's fault." 6 months after losing Chukwuebuka, Ifeoma and Dubim's marriage fell apart completely. They couldn't look at each other without seeing the lies, the deception, the massive failure that their life together had become. They divorced quietly. No big drama, just two broken people going their separate ways. Ifeoma moved to a small apartment in Enugu, far from Owerri and all the memories there. She was allowed to see Chukwuebuka once a month. He called her Auntie Ifeoma now, and each time he said it, it felt like a small death. Chioma, to her credit, didn't poison the boy against Ifeoma. She explained gently that sometimes adults make mistakes, and that Auntie Ifeoma had taken care of him when his real mummy couldn't, and that he should always be grateful for that. But he was Chioma's son now, living in Chioma's house, calling Chioma's husband Daddy. Ifeoma watched from a distance as he grew, changed, became someone slightly different than the boy she'd raised. 2 years after losing Chukwuebuka, Ifeoma sat in a therapist's office in Enugu. "I destroyed everything," she said, tears flowing freely. "My marriage, my family, that child's sense of security, all because I couldn't accept that some things aren't meant to be." The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Adeze, listened patiently. "What I did was wrong," Ifeoma continued. "I know that. But at the time, it didn't feel wrong. It felt like survival, like the only option I had left." "Why did you feel that way?" Dr. Adeze asked gently. "Because society made me feel like I was worthless without a child. My mother-in-law told me I was useless. My husband grew cold. Everywhere I went, people asked when I would have a baby, like that was my only purpose in life." "And how do you feel now about your worth?" Ifeoma thought about this for a long time. "I still don't know," she admitted. "I know logically that children don't define a woman's value, but emotionally, I still feel like I failed at the most basic thing I was supposed to do." "What if," Dr. Adezi said carefully, "instead of seeing yourself as someone who failed to have a child, you saw yourself as someone who survived tremendous pressure and pain? Someone who made mistakes, yes, but who loved deeply and tried desperately to create a family in the only way she thought possible. Ifeoma couldn't speak. The tears came harder. You made wrong choices, the therapist continued. But those choices came from a place of deep pain caused by a society that told you your only value was in your womb. That's not an excuse, but it is context. And maybe in understanding that context, you can begin to forgive yourself. 3 years after the custody case, something unexpected happened. Chioma called Ifeoma. "Hello?" Ifeoma answered, surprised to see the name. "Ifeoma, it's Chioma. I need to talk to you." Ifeoma's heart raced. "Is Chukwuebuka okay?" "He's fine, physically, but he's been asking about you a lot. He's 10 now, old enough to understand more, and he's been having some struggles." "What kind of struggles?" "Identity issues, I think. He knows I'm his biological mother, but he still remembers you raising him for his first 7 years. He's confused about who he is, where he belongs." "I'm sorry," Ifeoma said automatically. "No, don't apologize. I'm calling because I think we need to talk, you, me, and Chukwuebuka, together. Maybe if we're all honest with each other, it will help him make sense of his story." They met at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant in Owerri. Chukwuebuka was there, 10 years old now, looking so much older than the 7-year-old Ifeoma had lost. "Hi, Auntie Ifeoma," he said shyly. "Hi, Chukwuebuka," Ifeoma replied, her voice thick with emotion. They sat down, 3 people connected by one complicated, painful truth. "Chukwuebuka," Chioma began gently, "Auntie Ifeoma and I want to talk to you about something important, about your story." And together they told him everything, age appropriately but honestly. They explained that Chioma had given birth to him but couldn't take care of him at first. That Ifeoma wanted a baby very badly and made an arrangement that seemed right at the time but was actually wrong. That both women had loved him, both had wanted what was best for him, but had gone about it in complicated ways. "So," Chukwuebuka said slowly, trying to understand, "you're my real mom?" He pointed to Chioma. "I'm your biological mother, yes. But Auntie Ifeoma raised me when I was little?" "Yes," Ifeoma said. "So, you're both my mums, kind of?" The 2 women looked at each other, something passing between them, understanding maybe, or at least recognition of shared pain. "Kind of," Chioma said carefully. "I'm your mother now, and I take care of you. But Auntie Ifeoma loved you very much and took care of you when you were small." Both things can be true. Chukwuebuka thought about this. "Can I still see Auntie Ifeoma sometimes, more than once a month?" Chioma looked at Ifeoma. "Would you want that?" "More than anything," Ifeoma whispered. "Then yes," Chioma said. "We can arrange that." Over the next few years, an unusual but workable arrangement developed. Chukwuebuka lived primarily with Chioma and her husband, but spent regular time with Ifeoma, weekends, holidays, school breaks. It wasn't traditional, it wasn't simple, but it was honest, and gradually it began to heal some of the wounds. Ifeoma never tried to replace Chioma. She accepted her role as someone who had been important in Chukwuebuka's early life and could still be part of his life now, just differently. Chioma, for her part, came to appreciate that Ifeoma's love for Chukwuebuka had been real, even if her methods had been wrong. And Chukwuebuka learned that families can be complicated, that people can make terrible mistakes while trying to do what they think is right, and that love doesn't always look the way storybooks say it should. One day, when Chukwuebuka was 15, he asked Ifeoma a question. They were sitting in her small Enugu apartment, eating akara and pap. Auntie Ifioma, he said, do you regret it, what you did? Ifioma put down her food and thought carefully about her answer. I regret lying, she said finally. I regret deceiving your father, Dubem, and causing so much pain. I regret that my actions created confusion and hurt for you. But do you regret me? Never, Ifioma said firmly. I could never regret loving you. Even if I loved you in a way that was wrong, the love itself was real. Does that make sense? Chukwuebuka nodded slowly. I think so. What I've learned, Ifioma continued, is that sometimes we want something so badly that we convince ourselves any means of getting it is justified. But that's not true. How we get things matters just as much as getting them. Do you think you'll ever have your own children? Chukwuebuka asked. Ifioma smiled sadly. I don't think so, and I've made peace with that. I'm 45 now, I'm not married, and honestly, I've realized that motherhood isn't the only way to have a meaningful life. What do you mean? I mean I've found other ways to matter. I volunteer at an orphanage. I mentor young women who are facing pressure to have children. I've learned that there are many ways to nurture life besides giving birth to it. Chukwuebuka smiled. You're a good auntie. Thank you, Ifioma said, her eyes filling with tears. That means more than you know. Years later, when Chioma's husband passed away from a sudden illness, Ifioma was one of the first people to show up at the funeral. She held Chioma as she cried, and the two women, once connected only by deception, found themselves genuinely caring for each other. Thank you for being here, Chioma whispered. Where else would I be? Ifioma replied. Life had taught them both hard lessons, that desperation makes us do terrible things, that lies, no matter how well-intentioned, eventually destroy what they were meant to protect, that children are not possessions or solutions to our problems, but human beings deserving of truth and stability. But it had also taught them that people can grow, change, and find unexpected grace in the aftermath of their worst mistakes.